I've played video games for a long time. Ever since I picked up my DS at the age of 7, I've gone through a lengthy series of consoles and brands as I've grown up and matured into the rancid man-child I am today. I've played my Halos, my Marios, my Legos, my bisexual awakenings, and a whole lot more. But somehow, it's only been in the last couple of years or so that I've discovered my favourite game mechanic of all time, at least for right now when I'm making this video. That game mechanic is a little something called Permadeath. I love Permadeath as a game mechanic, it's one of my favourites, but I think there's usually a misconception as to how it works and is so affecting. So in this video, I'm going to be drawing upon a lot of different examples to show why Permadeath is more than just functionality. It also gives me a chance to bring up the hot vampire lady from Darkest Dungeon again, so... Permadeath is a usually optional difficulty setting for a lot of titles where dying means game over for good. This means that you have to start again from scratch without being able to revisit any checkpoints or load any saves. What's done is done and you can't change that. You typically see this in a lot of indie roguelike games such as Enter the Gungeon. It's something that lends itself well to titles that involve runs. Every time you die, you lose your items and progress and have to start again. But with every death, you're able to further yourself just a little bit more. If you meet certain requirements in Spelunky, you can have tunnels dug that allow you to get to later sections of the game without having to backtrack through the earlier segments, and this is something that you can do also in Enter the Gungeon. This works well for me, because I suck dick at Enter the Gungeon.
Oh, this guy's easy as hell. This guy's easy.
1 minute later.
If I lose this fight now, if I lose the fight, I swear to God. Oh my...
You also have similar modes in games such as Minecraft and No Man's Sky, where dying means that one procedural world is gone and you have to start somewhere new entirely. I remember growing up during the less hellish days of YouTube and watching Peanut Butter Gamer's hardcore Minecraft series, where him and other YouTubers would play through a Minecraft world, and if they died, it meant you were stricken from the game and the rest of the saga. What I like so much about this is the added weight to everything you do. In Minecraft, seeing a massive ravine isn't so daunting on normal mode. If you've slept in a bed nearby and have a bucket of water, jumping headfirst into the abyss and risking going splat across the stone isn't so scary. But when I have the last few hours worth of progress in jeopardy, that suddenly changes. There's no safety net to catch me and my virtual life is at risk. Doing something as dangerous as this isn't worth the collateral of the hours of sanity I spent getting to this point. But this isn't what I want to focus on. This is Permadeath, don't get me wrong, but it's an iteration of it that I don't particularly care for. As I suffer from a very strong lack of skill, something I've had since birth, I'm not confident enough in my epic gamer abilities to surpass these obstacles consistently. Instead, the iteration of Permadeath I prefer to focus on is less about trying to survive the entire duration of a game without dying, and is more about looking after the well-being and lives of multiple different characters. This involves acknowledging that, at some point, you're gonna fuck it up. Fire Emblem Awakening is the 13th installment in the Fire Emblem saga. Released in 2012, the game is cited as ultimately saving the Fire Emblem series, and was seen as an impressive addition to the lineup for both newcomers and hardcore veterans alike. I got this game in 2016, admittedly first because I thought Maribel was hot, and then I had my bisexual awakening and I thought Star was hot, and then I soon realised that these two characters weren't real and no one was going to love me. What made me stay with Awakening, however, was the classic mode. In classic mode, if a unit's HP hits 0, they're dead, gone, forsaken, you can't get them back. I wasn't very good at it, so I inevitably opted for casual instead, but what gripped me so much was the weight it added to my decisions in the same way Minecraft Hardcore does. The safety net is being taken away. On casual, I can make risky moves because any units that hit 0 HP will retain their experience points and will be available for the next mission. On classic, that's just not the case, and I have to ensure the moves I make are sound, or I'll pay the price for it. What sucks the most about losing a character is that they're more than just a unit. Awakening was the first Fire Emblem game to have support conversations and pairing up, meaning characters would develop relationships and even romances between battles based on how much time they've spent fighting together. You developed a rapport between members of your team and ultimately between yourself and said units. Bad North is another game where permadeath works in the same way. You move from island to island, fending off hordes of Vikings with a team of medieval commanders that all wield different weapons, abilities, and skills. Your armies act as your commander's health bar. A neat visual trick in my opinion, where the less soldiers you have means the closer to death that unit is. You can use the nearby houses to heal and reinforce your troops, but if your commander falls, that's it. That commander is dead unless you find a holy grail to revive them. But the distinction here is that, unlike Awakening, these commanders really are just units. Sure, the portraits they have convey some sort of emotion. This is a person, and from my understanding of the world, people don't like dying. But I don't see them have any sort of interaction with their compatriots. They don't discuss their likes and dislikes, their joys and woes, their troubles and hopes, or anything with anyone. They're just utility with a face on it. Utility that is easily replaceable with a plethora of commanders I can recruit throughout the campaign, especially considering that the final mission only lets you use 4 commanders anyway. With a limited pool of classes and items, this means that you can lose 6 commanders and still not really be hurt by it either emotionally or logistically. When my boy toy Starl dies and cries out as he falls, that fucking hurts. If I've spent a lot of time upgrading him and a lot of time reading through his conversations, it's damage I have to recover from. When I lose one of my shitty pike units that can't hold a front line to save their life, it hardly even registers. They're easy to replace, and I didn't really regard them as a person because the game didn't really regard them as a person in the first place. Characterizing the units in Awakening through support conversations and things such as pain and death cries makes losing them hurt. It makes the repercussion of failure hurt enough that you're second guessing yourself at every decision. That, to me, is why I love this iteration of permadeath that much more. It's not just about my individual struggles against my inevitable end as a player, but guarding the lives of fictional characters I like. And sometimes find hot. Actually, a lot of the time, find hot. I'm not down bad at this point, I think I'm just touch-starved. Instead, it's about the pressures that come with monitoring this cohort of brave souls, and acknowledging the mortal peril they'll be put in as a result. But here's the kicker. You see, the Fire Emblem series as a whole is one of the front runners for permadeath. In the old games, classic mode was mandatory, and the inevitable emotional kick in the nuts you got was fated. Adding casual mode is great because it makes the game more accessible to people less familiar with the series, and ensures people can actually have fun. Which is something the Elden Ring nerds seem to forget is the whole point of games every time there's another debate on video game difficulty. But there's another thing intelligent systems added to Awakening that I think challenges what makes permadeath so morbidly satisfying in the first place. As I said before, classic mode in Awakening means that a unit cannot be used again if their health reaches 0. They fall over, sputter the last words, and disappear from the map forever. But not all of them die. If a hero that's important to the story falls, they retire, which is functionally the same as them dying, but in the credits scene they live on like the survivors do. Now, this is understandable, because the writers already spent a long time writing dialogue for multiple combinations of character interactions and specific marriage scenes with the main characters, so having to then rewrite the whole story if an important character dies would be insane. But even if for good reason, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Of the 48 playable characters in Awakening, 17 of them retreat. It may not seem like a lot, but most of these are characters that don't have any presence in pivotal scenes or plot points. There's no real reason that they are kept alive. Now you're probably already asking, Smug, why does it matter? Whether a character retreats or dies doesn't change anything. That unit is still lost. It's exactly the same. I disagree. You wanna know why? Pokemon. A happy game where you explore multiple fantasy regions and battle against other trainers to become the best Pokemon trainer there is. Along the way, your cohort of Pokemon grows, you form great friendships, and embark on fantastic adventures. When I was 10, there were 2 genders, Soul Silver and Heart Gold. I picked Soul Silver because Lugia is cool, fuck all the idiots who think otherwise. Now, a Nuzlocke is a self-imposed set of rules that were created to elevate the game to a higher level of difficulty, similar to what most people call an Iron Man mode. There are many variations and specific tweaks people use, and there are many videos and forums for each. I'd be surprised at this point of the internet if someone does not know what a Nuzlocke run is, but the universal ground rules are as follows. Rule number 1. You can only catch the first Pokemon on every route or area and none else. If you don't catch this Pokemon, tough luck. Rule 2. You cannot reset if things go bad. No matter how much you may fuck something up, you keep rolling with the punches until you win or you lose. Rule number 3. If your Pokemon faints, they die. They must be released or stored away in a designated box at the Poké Center. Welcome to Pokemon Vietnam Edition. You must survive a perilous journey from your hometown to the final battle against the champions of the league. No longer are wild adversaries these cute and endearing creatures that can be your friends, but instead savage marauders that long to skewer, slaughter, maim, butcher and eviscerate your party of hapless woodland creatures. If all your loyal warriors die, you lose, and you must start again from the beginning. Nuzlocks, to me, are exemplary examples of why I love Permadeath. The tension, the stress, the added weight of potential victory and defeat resting upon every decision. When Alpharad applied these rules to his Lightlock run for Smash Bros. Ultimate, I ate up every single episode. When Jaden Animations posted her Nuzlocke runs, I was hooked. The fact a Nuzlocke provides so much joy and is just a set of rules you voluntarily abide by really drives home how much fun you can have with single player games in this era of multiplayer centric titles. It could honestly be a video in of itself. It could also be a video about how annoying the gaming industry is, because apparently Pokemon Company and Nintendo equate Nuzlocks with ROM hacks and they chastise employees for suggesting Nuzlocke events or whatever.
We thought that this would be a fun idea for a Nintendo Minute video.
We did, yeah.
And so we pitched it to the Pokemon Company
And
and
we
say,
did
hey,
not get slapped.
we would like to do a Nuzlocke run. What do you think?
And they thought they were going to fire us.
They said, here's what we think.
But we're not here to talk about either of that today. Why did I bring up Nuzlocks? To explain my earlier discrepancy with Awakening. Rule 3. Oh, great heaven! A lot of the pain that comes from permadeath games is the fact you come to know your units even in the most minute of ways. They become special to you, important to you, and through all the peril and hardship, you want them to succeed. You want them to make it. Having your Pokemon faint and having your Pokemon die are two very different outcomes to losing that emotionally affect you. You come to cherish your starter Pokemon as your best friend, as your strongest warrior, as your prodigy, and having them die is tantamount defeat in its own right. That's what pisses me off about Awakening's permadeath, because having a unit retreat does not elicit the same emotional reaction from me as a unit dying. When Sully hits 0 HP, her and her horse retreat for the rest of the game. When Starl hits 0 HP, him and his horse are dead. Doing this, in my opinion, is assuming that a unit's value to the player is only ever tied to its functionality or its performance. And that's simply not true. In Nuzlocke, I've seen players develop great emotional attachments to units that are feeble and weak. I've seen them react profoundly to sacrificing them in order to save more useful and worthwhile members of the team.
This didn't work
Wait,
out
did
well.
you just switch in Tractor?
Yes.
Oh my god, no, I was saying we should switch in like somebody else. You just murdered Tractor, Grant!
I didn't think Tractor would die. I figured he'd survive.
No! Tractor's dead! You just killed! Why would you? We were in the middle of a goddamn conversation, Grant!
In later Fire Emblem games such as Shadows of Valentia, story-important characters that fall early are mortally wounded and continue on in cutscenes, but are then said to have died shortly after the campaign's conclusion. That elicits a very different feeling than them simply surviving the ordeal due to a bad wound. I focused on Awakening because, to me, it highlights how this oversight proves how important the dying part of permadeath is, even if it's not at all relevant to how the mechanic works in the game. You don't feel bad because defeat means removing utility from your team, but because defeat means emphasizing that you failed someone in the grandest way and you have to deal with that baggage. But why does losing a unit hurt so much? Why should it matter that I failed a sprite on a screen? These aren't real people or entities, these aren't real emotions or moments, it's just dressing for what these characters are. Tools you use to win. That's what these games are about, winning or completing an objective. That's why losing your starter Pokemon hurts so much, because typically they're your strongest asset. How can you care so much for a Pokemon when they don't talk or interact with others? Where does the emotional connection come from for these units? To address all of these potential doubts people may have in what I'm saying, I want to now talk about two of my favourite Permadeath titles of all time. Darkest Dungeon is a game created by Red Hook Studios, currently my favourite game development team. This title has you manage a growing cohort of mercenaries, killers, warriors and outcasts in order to dispatch the mounting eldritch evils surrounding your ancestors' estate and to eventually descend into the Darkest Dungeon and stop the end of the world. In short, it's Lovecraftian D&D without the racist cat.
There is an absolute disproportionate amount of crime committed to whites by
XCOM Enemy Within and XCOM 2 were created by Firaxis Studios as major design overhauls of the older XCOM games such as UFO Defense. Here you play as the nameless commander of XCOM forces, the overseer of tactical operations that form the last line of defense for humanity against a never-ending onslaught of alien marauders. I have played both of these games for years. I remember getting XCOM Enemy Within after watching Christopher Odd play through Long War in 2014, and never before was I so gripped by a game. Darkest Dungeon was the first game I got on the Nintendo Switch, and I loved it so much that I went on to buy it for the Xbox and PC afterwards. Both titles have been extremely formative in my appreciation for this creative industry, and also some of my own work too. There's so much I want to say about these titles, but because I want to make dedicated videos for both, we're gonna skim the fat and get right to the important bit. Dying. Darkest Dungeon tells you from the get-go that you're going to fail. You'll retreat from dungeons, you'll lose heroes, and you'll feel the sting of defeat time and time again. Sometimes the odds are just not stacked in your favour, even if you have everything planned out to cover the most minute of subversions. Pain is part of the process. You have an infinite supply of soldiers coming weekly to die for the cause, and injuries sustained in battle don't cause delay, apart from stress. The upgrades for your hamlet and money are ultimately worth more in the long run than some of your heroes' lives. Adversity is expected, and you're able to push on regardless of it. Meanwhile, XCOM expects you to be clearing missions without wound or casualty. It's entirely possible to reliably defeat enemy squadrons without taking a hit, saving you from the inconvenience of having your valuable sniper be inactive for the next month. Unlike Darkest Dungeon, soldiers aren't free. Base building is important for upgrades and bonuses, but ultimately ties into improving the longevity of your army. If you want to buy new recruits or experienced troops, that costs money. If you're routinely failing missions and losing units in the process, you're going to find yourself cornered and unable to react to enemy movements, meaning eventually you'll lose. These two games are the antithesis of one another in how they portray the mechanical weight of a unit dying. Yet, remarkably, the emotional pain of losing one feels exactly the same. How is this possible? Well, there's two reasons. The first is the importance of customization. In XCOM, you're able to change how your soldiers look to a satisfying depth of detail. In XCOM 2, you can change color palettes, skin color, facial hair, voices, armor, and this is all without the plethora of downloadable mods that can be used for completely free. In Darkest Dungeon, every character can have their own color palette changed, and there's also a wide range of skins available on the workshop. But, most crucially, you can give these units a name. And one of the critical rules to Nuzlocke I didn't tell you about was Rule 4. You have to give every Pokemon you catch a name so you can form an emotional bond. You've formed an identity that you can associate all of their triumphs and shortcomings with, and before they've even deployed, you know them now. You have a name to relate to a face, and even units you come to recognize only peripherally still bear meaning to you. This is an essential component in the emotional effect and stake of Permadeath. Warsaw, a game directly inspired by Darkest Dungeon's mechanics and art style, is another game that I wanted to check out. But you can't customize the characters. No names, no color palette swaps, nothing. And while the game does look mechanically interesting, I just wouldn't be able to relate to these units and treasure them as I would in Darkest Dungeon without that crucial component. The name you give to your troops is valuable. And that's where the second reason comes in. A lot of these Permadeath games are long, very long. A typical run through of Darkest Dungeon without DLC can be anywhere between 40 to 50 hours. With the average dungeon lasting about 20 to 30 minutes, that's a lot of time you're spending alongside your troops. XCOM 2 is a bit more padded out due to base management and research components, but you're still spending a lot of your game time in battles alongside them. This is crucial because due to this length of time, you become acquainted with each and every character beyond their name. What you've chosen to call them acts as a way of bookmarking everything they do. You have heroes that you can depend on, ones that you've managed to endure the worst of the worst with, and you have heroes you come to know as complete letdowns, the Keemstars of your team.
The real question is...
I will literally kill this motherfucker.
You bitch!
Those names become referential to their long histories in your party. They know every victory and defeat they've secured, and ultimately they become markers of your failure to mourn when they die. You have all this time to make associations between their names and what they did, what missions they completed, what amazing clutches they snagged. I've had a bounty hunter called Hexion on a practice run for my streams beat the Fanatic whilst enduring consecutive death's door checks because I was panicking. My warlord Homevarn got a virtue check twice during my 2 fights against the Baron, and arguably was the reason they got home alive and victorious. Those names, the moment I hear them, remind me of all they did and achieved. And that's why I love Permadeath. You don't need your characters to have interactions between one another to have an emotional stake in them, because you are having an interaction with said characters by playing. You're naming them, doting over them, hating them and loving them, fearing for them, spending valuable resources to ensure they survive and deliver success. Through all the hours you spend playing, your thoughts and perceptions of these heroes change, and the random nature of gameplay makes it so every campaign is different from the last, even if you know the overall trajectory of how the game goes. The RNG combined with the large cohort of troops almost makes it like a randomized TV show specific to you, where every character could die at a moment's notice and everybody is fair game, no plot armor or game over issued for any one individual. I also think it makes for a fantastic spectator sport, which is apparently something the devs of the game didn't think would happen. I stream XCOM and Darkest Dungeon on Twitch a lot, and I have troops named after Discord members, and it adds a whole new layer to the sentimental value everyone has beyond just my relationship with them, and the chat reels and celebrates as I do when someone dies or clutches a bad situation. Oh, leave Steven alone!
Precipice of oblivion.
No! No! That's what I mean by the randomized TV show aspect of these kind of permadeath games. It's just so entertaining. There's an almost masochistic aspect to tuning in to attach yourself to a character from someone's playthrough of a Nuzlocke and sitting there fearing for their life as they sit on low health, one blow away from their demise. And when they do die, there is such a profound sense of guilt that comes from it. Losing your favorite hero, whether they're a gimmick character or your best asset, has to be one of the most gut-wrenching things ever. Along this journey, you've become so engrossed in their success and their survival that their demise leaves you feeling so empty. In Darkest Dungeon, heroes will speak on death's door, issuing some form of lamenting phrase or final cry of bravery as they approach the end. In XCOM, your soldiers react when hurt and yell out when they die. This worsens the emotional toll on the player that makes you second guess everything you're doing. It's the consequence of failure that rivals even the sting of losing the actual game itself. It's enough that, like me, you may just uninstall the fucking thing or restart the progress out of frustration and despair. It's these elevated stakes that make you so engrossed in the action. It can't all be attributed to just permadeath, because the game itself has to be fun enough for you to access it emotionally in the first place. But it's certainly an aspect of a title that keeps you reeled in for more. And the reason why, in my opinion, it keeps you so immersed is because of endurance. When a soldier dies in one of these games, whether that be Awakening or Darkest Dungeon or XCOM, they're dead for good, and you have to continue on without them. The game overtly telling you that they're dead instead of having retreated or been badly wounded delivers that fateful blow to your morale. It upsets you. You came to know these characters beyond their usefulness in the game, and you wanted to see them survive. But if you could immediately restart that level and try again, it wouldn't matter. It'd be a flash in the pan, something abrupt and temporary, yet softened by the ability to redo. In these games, critically, you can't do that. You have to carry on. To me, this is crucial. It teaches you that, in permadeath, the consequences of failure are long-standing. This seems kind of obvious, right? Why would I bother dedicating another chapter to it? Well, conveniently enough, both Darkest Dungeon and XCOM 2 have direct counterparts in the same franchises that I think miss this notion. Chris Barassa, in the Escapist documentary for Darkest Dungeon, said that Darkest Dungeon 2 had to be a different game. After players had tasted Darkest Dungeon 1, a second installment that only served to expand on well-known mechanics and features wouldn't ever make the same splash. It had to be something that was completely different, arguably even about a different thing. I can understand the necessity in needing to diversify and distance the sequel from the original in regards to mechanics and overall design choices. Otherwise, people might just get bored and not tune in for Darkest Dungeon 2. That being said, there was an interesting video I watched that addressed exactly why it feels slightly subpar as of right now.
I didn't care. I was wholeheartedly excited to start another run. But I didn't care about the characters. I didn't feel that same sense of somber reflection that I had experienced when losing characters in Darkest Dungeon 1.
Darkest Dungeon 2 is a permadeath game in the same way Enter the Gungeon is. It's based on runs. You pick a handful of heroes and make the trek up the mountain to the final boss. If a hero dies, then that's something you have to deal with for the full run. You don't get to go back and pick a new party, that's it. When everyone dies, you restart the run, picking out characters and setting off from the beginning. Darkest Dungeon 2, in its transition into something new and distinct, shed that crucial aspect of permadeath and, honestly, its identity. Endurance. Making the best of a bad situation. You don't have to suffer through the dread and stress of losing a valued soldier. You don't have to endure loss. Once you lose, you start over again. Additionally, you don't get to customize any of the heroes, at least at this point in time. Heroes are given strict names, strict outfits, and can't be customized at all. Some may argue that this is similar to Awakening. These are set characters with set personalities and appearances. But Fire Emblem had the emotional stake of death, of having to push on in lieu of casualties, of connecting with someone who could die from an unlucky roll of the dice. What's bizarre is that in Darkest Dungeon 2, Red Hook actually tried to add a full relationship and interaction system between heroes, and somehow it feels less than the simple barks heroes had with one another. Perhaps because they've added a greater degree of functionality and mechanical stake to it that it's lost its charm as this interaction? But personally, I think it's because the inner relationships between heroes was always up to the player's imagination. It allowed me to have my own personal stake in how my heroes got along. That was up to me to engage with and interpret, but because the game is now putting it in my face and telling me what's going on, it feels different. And without the long-standing campaign-style format, it's ultimately something short-lived and temporary that serves to buff my heroes mechanically instead of contribute to the ongoing and fluctuating emotional attachments I have with them. That, to me, was a big part of the draw for Darkest Dungeon. XCOM Chimera Squad is similarly different. They changed the way combat turns work and gave it a completely different context from the original games, but characters cannot die. If they hit 0 HP, they become incapacitated and need to be saved. If they die, it's game over. I'm not drawn in by this. Possibly because this game just straight up doesn't claim to be permadeath, but XCOM as a franchise was always about loss and mitigating damages and waging a war in which you're going to see your soldiers die. That was always integral to its identity, in my opinion. And while it's simply a spin-off game, I was sorely disappointed when I found out about the absence of this crucial mechanic. You can't name characters, you can't customize them, you can't make them personal to you. And you can't even value your relationships with them more because you know that you're never going to lose them. The game is always going to revert back to square one and start again without much deduction or consequence, so there's no risk to emotionally investing in some of your favorite characters. Permadeath is so much more of an emotional and sentimental mechanic than a hard-coded game mode. The fact you can pick up Pokemon and play by these self-imposed rules without hard restrictions written into the game itself speaks to that. It plays off his willingness to elevate the stakes, to play at the high rollers table, to satisfy the urges of emotional masochists such as myself. It provides a heightened sense of meaning and value to your characters and to the emotional value you associate with them, to the time you spent naming and customizing them. It offers an emotional experience unique to the medium, fostering an involvement from player and viewer alike in a way that no TV show or film or book can hope to emulate. There's a criminal shortage of these kinds of games on Steam and console, games I desperately want to see more of, and that scarcity only makes me value these existing titles I mentioned even more. I strongly recommend those watching to check out all the games I mentioned here, especially Darkest Dungeon and XCOM and their sequel counterparts. This video wasn't just about why Permadeath is so much more than mechanical functionality, but why I love it as an aspect of game design so damn much. I mean, I didn't even bring up the vampire lady's boobs once, that shows how much I care about it.